Hello and welcome to Nikolai's Genetics Lessons, and today's video going to be about how to understand pedigree, and today we are going to answer two questions. First question would be, we have to find the mode of genetic disorder inheritance, looking and analyzing this pedigree, and the second question would be, what is the probability of the person 1 in 6 generation to be affected with this genetic disorder. And if you think that you can solve this problem on your own, I recommend you to stop video here, try to solve this problem on your own first, and when you would be ready you can run video again and you can compare your answer with my answer and explanation. So let's start with the first question. There can be many different modes of inheritance, but typically we stop with 4 modes of inheritance, that is autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, and X-linked recessive. And of course there are more than 4 modes of inheritance. For example, another one can be Y chromosome linked genetic disorder and also mitochondrial genetic disorder that have very distinctive pattern of inheritance. So let's start with X-linked dominant genetic disorder. Could this be X-linked dominant genetic disorder or not? We see here one person who is affected, and a genotype of this person have to be at least one defective X chromosome and another normal X chromosome. So because this is dominant X-linked genetic disorder, just one defective chromosome would be enough for this person to be affected with this genetic disorder. So no matter from whom this person got this defective chromosome with defective allele on it, whether from the mother side or father side, we have to see that at least one of the parents have to be also affected with this genetic disorder, because mother phenotype would be the same, heterozygous, and she would be affected, and if father would have this defective chromosome, he also would be affected. So we can say that this is not X-linked dominant genetic disorder. So let's now consider if it is X-linked recessive genetic disorder. In this case, for example, father cannot have this genetic disorder because father is hemizygous, or his genotype would be defective X chromosome and normal Y chromosome, and even if it is recessive X-linked genetic disorder, he would be affected with this genetic disorder because he doesn't have another X chromosome to balance this defective chromosome. So this female cannot get defective chromosome from the father side, and if mother would be heterozygous and her phenotype would be normal, one defective chromosome that this female would inherit from her mother wouldn't be enough to produce this genetic disorder, because another X chromosome would be normal, so she would be heterozygous. So we excluded possibility that this is X-linked dominant genetic disorder. We excluded the possibility that this is X-linked recessive genetic disorder. Now let's consider that this can be autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive genetic disorder. If this is going to be autosomal dominant genetic disorder, person number 4 in the second generation have to be at least heterozygous for this genetic disorder. So her genotype have to be capital A and small a. And with red color I show defective autosomal chromosome or allele, and with green color I'm showing normal recessive allele. So this is we consider autosomal dominant genetic disorder. So this person would be affected even if she is going to be heterozygous. but she have to inherit this defective allele from one of the parents, whether from the father side or mother side. That means if it would be autosomal dominant genetic disorder, one of her parents, at least one of her parents, have to be also affected with this genetic disorder. So we can exclude that this is autosomal dominant genetic disorder, and the only possibility left that this is autosomal recessive genetic disorder, and genotype of the parents would be father have to be heterozygous, so dominant normal allele A and recessive defective allele A, and mother also have to be heterozygous, so her genotype have to be normal dominant allele and recessive allele A. And when we build a Punnett square, as you see, we can predict outcome of such a cross. So here we would have capital A, capital A and small a here, capital A and small a here, and small a here. So as you see, 3 out of 4 chances that the progeny of this couple would be phenotypically normal, and 1 out of 4 chances that they would have affected progeny. So as you see, parents would be phenotypically normal because this is autosomal recessive genetic disorder. So two parents who is phenotypically normal may have progeny that would be affected with this genetic disorder if progeny would be homozygous recessive for this genetic disorder. So now we know genotypes of the parents, and genotype would be capital A and small a for one parent, capital A and small a for the second parent, and genotype of the affected person number 4 in second generation would be small a, small a. So we have found that this is autosomal recessive. So we can write down this answer. And now we can calculate the probability that person number 1 in 6th generation would be affected with this genetic disorder. And as you see, we have some peculiarities here about this pedigree. As you see, we have parental generation here, then we have consanguineous mating in generation number 5. That means that this is going to be inbreeding, and any of these recessive alleles can pass and join in person number 1 in 6th generation. And we have to calculate the probability of such an event. And person number 1 in 6th generation, as you see, the gender is not specified, so we assume that this person is not born yet. We just have a couple who came to the genetist for consultation to find out the probability to have affected child. And as you see, we can put a double bond here because this is consanguineous mating between relatives. And also we have here mother and father. So all these branches here would be maternal inheritance relative to this child, and everything here that we have on the right would be paternal inheritance of the recessive allele. So in order to calculate the probability for the person number 1 to be homozygous recessive for this genetic disorder, we have to calculate probability for this person to inherit recessive allele A from mother side, and also probability to inherit another recessive allele A from the father side. And then we would find the probability for him to be homozygous recessive and be affected with this genetic disorder, just like one of his relatives here. So let's start. We know that this parental generation are obligate heterozygous, and we have to calculate the probability for the person number 2 in second generation to inherit recessive allele A. We can use our Punnett square here. So we have two heterozygous parents, and as you see, probability that person number 2 in second generation would inherit recessive allele would be 2 chances out of 3. You may ask why not 2 out of 4? And the answer would be because we know that this person, as you see according to our pedigree, is not affected with this genetic disorder. So we have to choose the probability for this person to be heterozygous among these 3 variants. And one of them would be homozygous dominant. So as you see, we know that this person belongs to this group, and probability that he has a recessive allele would be 2 out of 3. So let's write down this information. So we have person number 2 in second generation, and his probability to be heterozygous, so to be phenotypically normal, but still to be a carrier of this recessive allele, his probability would be 2 out of 3. Now we can also make a pathway. So from person number 2 in second generation, we can connect with person number 2 in third generation. Then we can connect person number 2 in third generation with person number 1 in fourth generation. And then we have to connect this person with person number 4 in fifth generation. And of course, then we have to connect with the future child. So this is going to be our maternal pathway. So we know that person number 2 in second generation has probability to inherit recessive allele, and the probability is 2 out of 3. So this is probability for her to be heterozygous. And now let's assume that all people who is outcrossers, and we call outcrossers all the people who is not genetically related to these two people, that we also call parental generation. So we assume that all the outcrossers would be phenotypically and genotypically normal. So we assume that this is rare genetic disorder. And genotype would be capital A, capital A. So once again, let's build a Punnett square. We have one parent who is heterozygous and another parent who is homozygous dominant. Now let's calculate the probability for the progeny to be carrier, to be heterozygous, to be phenotypically normal, but to be a carrier. So capital A here, capital A here, capital A and small a here, and capital A and small a here. As you see, probability for this couple to have a child who is going to be a carrier of this genetic disorder would be 1/2, or 2 out of 4, or 0.5, or 50%. You may use any system. These all numbers mean the same. So the probability that person number 2 in third generation would be heterozygous is 1/2. half. So once again, person number 2 in third generation, his probability to be carrier of this genetic disorder, to have this recessive allele, would be 1/2. So now let's calculate the further probability that this person would give this recessive allele to the person number 1 in the fourth generation. So person number 1 in the fourth generation. Once again, we assume that all outcrossers, people who is not directly related to the parental generation, would be genotypically normal. And once again, the same rule applies to this couple also. The probability that person number 1 in the first generation would inherit this recessive allele also would be 1/2. So let's put this number here. And now let's move to the person number 4 in fifth generation. So number 4 in fifth generation, his probability to inherit this genetic disorder would be the same as in previous example. So this outcrosser we assume to be phenotypically and genotypically normal, to be homozygous. So probability that person number 4 in the fifth generation would inherit this recessive allele would be the same and would be 1/2. And the last step, the probability that this person would give this recessive allele to their unborn child would be also 1/2. So we have calculated right now the probability that the child would inherit one recessive allele from maternal side. Now let's calculate the probability that this child would inherit this recessive allele from paternal side, where we are going to start on the paternal side. Should we start from the parental generation or not? Actually not, because we know that this person number 4 in second generation is obligate homozygous recessive, and this gives us information, and we start our calculation from actually next person in generation number 3. What is the probability for this person to be heterozygous, to be phenotypically normal, but still have recessive allele? And the probability would be 100%, because we know that genotype of this person is small a. We know that all outcrossers are homozygous normal, so genotype of this person would be capital A, and that means that 100% of their progeny would be heterozygous, or would be capital A and small a. And this person here, the other daughter, also have to be obligate heterozygous, because father only can give dominant allele and mother can give only recessive allele. So 100% of the children in such a cross would be heterozygous. So we can say that probability that this person has recessive allele is 100%, or 1. Probability that this person is carrier is 100%, or 1. So we don't use these two persons in our calculations, because any number multiplied by 1 would be the same number. So our calculations start with probability of the person number 4 in fourth generation to be a carrier. So on the paternal side, pathway for the recessive allele would be as follows. So we start with probability of the person number 4 to be heterozygous. So once again, this person number 6 in third generation have to be homozygous normal because he is outcrosser, and probability for the person number 4 in fourth generation to be a carrier of this recessive allele would be 1/2. So as you see, the same Punnett square applies to the probability of this person to be a carrier. Now let's calculate probability for the son of this couple to be heterozygous. Once again, this person is outcrosser, and we assume that she is homozygous normal, and probability for the person number 5 in fifth generation to be carrier would be 1/2. And the last step, probability that this person would give recessive allele to his unborn child would be 1/2. So he has two alleles. He is phenotypically, as we see, normal, but we have to find the probability that another allele is recessive, and he would pass this recessive allele to his unborn child. So the probability, once again, he has two alleles. One have to be normal because he is phenotypically normal, and the probability that he would give his second allele that we assume can be a recessive allele to his child, the probability would be 1/2. So his child would be number 1 in sixth generation. So we can put also number 1 in sixth generation here. And now, as you see, we have two pathways how this recessive allele can end up in the child of this couple, and we can now calculate the probability that the child would be homozygous recessive and would be affected regardless of the sex of the child. What we have to do now, we have to multiply all these independent probabilities. And should we add these two probabilities, or should we multiply these two probabilities? Actually, we have to multiply these two probabilities because this is independent probabilities and not mutually exclusive, meaning that if a recessive allele would be inherited from father side, it doesn't exclude the probability that another recessive allele would be inherited from the mother side. So this is not mutually exclusive probabilities. So we have to multiply these probabilities, and we would find the probability that the child would have two recessive alleles at the same time. So we put multiplication sign here. So probability to inherit recessive allele from the mother side would be 0.04125, and we have to multiply by probability to inherit another recessive allele from the father side, and the probability is 0.125. So as you see, probability that this child would inherit recessive allele from the mother side would be about 4%, and probability that this child would inherit recessive allele from the father side would be about 12.5%. And the last step would be to find the probability that person number 1 in sixth generation to be homozygous recessive. So to have two recessive alleles inherited both from the mother side and from the father side, and the answer would be 0.005. If you need an answer in percentage form, we just have to multiply this answer by 100, and the answer in percentage form would be 0.5%. And this is going to be our answer for the second question. So if we would be a genetic consultant for this couple, we may say that they have chances 1 out of 200 to have affected child with this genetic disorder. And this is all for today. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe for my new videos that I post almost every day. Thumbs up if you like this video. Please write your comments, questions if you have any. And see you in the next video. Goodbye.